It was the dark night of September 1980 when a supersized cargo ship battled fierce waves in the Pacific Ocean. A vessel even larger than the Titanic and towering as high as a 16-story building. A floating fortress of steel. But within just a few hours, it vanished without a trace. No radio signal, no floating wreckage. A ship weighing hundreds of thousands of tons, simply gone. For the next 20 years, authorities offered the same explanation. They said only this: the ship sank. But when the father of one missing crew member began to search for the truth, what he uncovered beneath the ocean shocked the entire world. On the evening of September 9, 1980, the massive cargo carrier MV Derbyshire was carving through the Pacific Ocean bound for Japan. But from the east, another force was approaching. Typhoon Orchid, a storm that was growing more violent by the hour. The Derbyshire had been sailing continuously for 8 long weeks. It had loaded 150,000 tons of iron ore in Canada, crossed the Atlantic, passed the southern coast of Africa, cut across the Indian Ocean, and was now close to its final destination. On board were 42 experienced men, engineers, helpers, and technical experts. They were counting the final hours of their long voyage. But fate had other plans. The captain, Geoffrey Underhill, had more than 20 years of experience at sea. His wife had already traveled to Japan to meet him, but that reunion would remain only a dream. For days, Captain Underhill had trusted the weather reports. He had survived many storms in his career, and he believed Derbyshire could withstand Typhoon Orchid. At that point, the nearest safe harbor was far away. The only choice was to fight through the storm. The captain reduced speed, turned the bow slightly toward the waves to keep stability, and even sent an emergency message, reporting the worsening conditions and sharing his exact location. But the typhoon's rage kept building. Waves rose more than 10 meters high. Some nearly matched the ship's own length. Derbyshire was over 1,000 feet long, longer and wider than Titanic, and as tall as a 16-story building. It was no ordinary vessel. It was a state-of-the-art fortress of steel, built to survive the deadliest seas. For the captain, Typhoon Orchid felt like just another challenge. But in the dark depths below, something was about to happen that no one had ever imagined. That same night, 2 other ships also fought through the typhoon. The next morning, both of them reached port safely. But the Derbyshire disappeared. No signal, no debris, nothing. A fortress of steel swallowed whole by the ocean. For 20 years, the world had no answers. The Derbyshire's last radio message had been sent on September 9th. After that, no distress call, no final words, only silence. For 6 days, no one raised the alarm. Not even the ship's owners reported it missing. They assumed the radio had failed and that Derbyshire would soon reappear along some distant shore. But days turned into weeks with no news. On September 15th, the ship's disappearance was finally taken seriously. An international search was launched. Helicopters, airplanes, naval ships scanning every mile around Derbyshire's last known coordinates. But not a single piece of wreckage was found. After 6 days, the search was abandoned. Authorities declared the case closed. The sea had swallowed the ship. And with no investigation, the world simply moved on. The news coverage faded. The voices of families were ignored. They were told there was nothing to investigate. But the families refused to accept it. They felt the truth was being deliberately hidden. The Derbyshire had been built only 4 years earlier, at the famous Swan Hunter shipyard in Britain. It could carry over 150,000 tons of cargo, 4 times more than ships built just 20 years earlier. And it wasn't just the size. It was also the design. Derbyshire was an OBO carrier, capable of carrying oil on one leg of a journey, and iron ore on the return trip. This meant it never sailed empty, maximizing profit. Compared to traditional vessels, Derbyshire could generate 30% more revenue. At that time, only 6 such ships existed in the world, and Derbyshire was considered among the finest. But behind the prestige, Swan Hunter was struggling. Japanese and South Korean shipyards were building faster and cheaper. The British yard was under intense pressure. They cut costs, and in those cuts may have been the seeds of disaster. For most families, the tragedy meant grief and unanswered questions. But for one man, it became a mission. Peter Ridyard had lost his young son aboard Derbyshire. But Peter was not only a father, he was also an experienced ship surveyor. He had spent his life analyzing ships and the sea. And when he began his own investigation, he uncovered a shocking truth. In 1982, just 18 months after Derbyshire vanished, another bridge-class ship, the Tyne Bridge, was struck by storms in the North Sea, and cracks began to appear in its steel structure. The captain ordered an immediate evacuation. The crew was rescued by airlift. The ship barely survived. When Peter examined the vessel, he found structural cracks at the front. After reviewing documents, he realized this wasn't an isolated case. Every bridge-class ship had developed cracks, all in the same location. And secretly, these ships were being recalled to ports for repair. But Peter uncovered something even more disturbing. These ships weren't built exactly as designed. In the rush to cut costs, key parts were altered from the original plans. Peter now held evidence strong enough to reopen the Derbyshire investigation. He sent everything to the Department of Transport. But instead of action, he received silence. The authorities insisted the Derbyshire had already been investigated. There would be no new inquiry. The families refused to be silenced. In 1984, they formed the Derbyshire Family Association, vowing to uncover the truth. In 1986, another bridge-class ship, the Kowloon Bridge, developed cracks and ran aground off Ireland. Its weakened hull collapsed under the waves. It was the sixth and last of the bridge-class ships still at sea. And unlike the others, it had never received secret repairs. This time, the British government could not stay quiet. They reopened the investigation. For 6 months, experts debated. Some blamed design, others blamed the ocean. But Peter's evidence, pointing directly to structural flaws, was ignored again. The final report claimed there was no proof of design failure. Derbyshire, they said, was just another ship, lost to the sea. For the families, this report was a slap in the face. They knew the truth was buried not in the ocean, but in the system. Yet they never gave up. In 1994, with support from the International Transport Workers Federation, the families funded a private search for the Derbyshire. After 14 long years, the mission began. And in just 23 hours of scanning, they found it. 4 kilometers below the surface, lying in one piece on the ocean floor, was the MV Derbyshire. For 6 years, investigators studied the wreck. Piece by piece, photo by photo, the truth emerged. At the very front of the ship was a compartment known as the bosun's store, where ropes, chains, and tools were kept. But unlike the original design, its door was poorly built. And in the storm, that door gave way. Tons of seawater rushed in. The bow grew heavy, sinking deeper into the waves. Soon, ventilators broke. Water flooded the machinery rooms. The bow plunged further. Then, a massive wave smashed open a hatch cover, as large as a tennis court, where iron ore was stored. One container after another filled with water. The ship's front sank lower and lower. And within minutes, Britain's largest vessel was gone, swallowed by the Pacific. The final report revealed the truth. All bridge-class ships had weaknesses near the bosun's store. Their hatch covers were fragile, below proper standards. The families had believed Derbyshire suffered a major design flaw. But in the end, it wasn't one huge mistake. It was a series of small oversights, tiny shortcuts that together doomed a mighty fortress of steel. In the 1970s, dozens of ships sank every year. For authorities, it had become just a numbers game. But the families of the Derbyshire refused to accept it. Their relentless fight exposed the shipping industry and forced change. New ship designs were introduced. Rules grew stricter. Safety inspections became tougher. Their struggle didn't just find one ship. It changed an entire industry. Even today, many safety rules in shipping exist because of the MV Derbyshire, a ship that still rests, silent, 4 kilometers beneath the Pacific Ocean.